following recent revelations about Justice Clarence Thomas receiving gifts, as well as selling a little bit of property to a billionaire, in this case, Harlan Crow, for many, many years and not disclosing them. Now we have another justice who also benefited from selling some property to someone who actually did end up having business before the Supreme Court. So now the details here are from a Politico piece, and here we go. Justice Gorsuch and two partners had sold some property that they had owned to the head of a major law firm, who again ended up having business and represented clients in front of the Supreme Court. The outlet reports that Gorsuch had sought a buyer for nearly 2 years for a 3,000 square foot home located northwest of Denver, and that the head of Greenberg Traurig, CEO Brian Duffy, ended up buying this property and putting it under contract 9 days after Gorsuch had been confirmed by the Senate in April of 2017. So you might be wondering, okay, and so what? Well, Greenberg Traurig, turns out, the company, the firm that employs more than 2,000 different attorneys, has been regularly involved in cases before the Supreme Court, none of which, of course, Gorsuch had to recuse himself from, because of course. Now, Grand County, Colorado real estate records show that Brian and Carrie Duffy, which match the names of the firm's CEO and his wife, closed on a property sold by Walden Group LLC, which is the name of Gorsuch's company that he owns, had along with two separate partners who were deeply, by the way, involved in the oil and gas business and helped him get a job as a judge earlier in his career. Sold on May 19, 2017. The sale was for $1.825 million. It's a nice chunk of change. Now, of course, Gorsuch had owned about 20% of that property. He had a 20% stake. 40% went to the other two, 40% each. So, all right. Now, Gorsuch, as I mentioned, owned a 20% stake in the company. And in his financial disclosure, the annual disclosure, that year he noted that he received between $250,000 and $1 to $500,000, because again, Supreme Court justices don't have to put an exact amount, but they do on these disclosure forms will put a range. There's the range for a sale stemming from the company. However, in the box where you were supposed to put the identity of the buyer, he left it blank. Intentionally, of course. I mean, come on. Now, in the report, Politico also notes that since the sale, Greenberg Traurig has been involved in at least 22 different cases before or presented to the court. They include cases in which Greenberg either filed amicus briefs or represented different parties. In the 12 cases where Gorsuch's opinion has been recorded, he sided with Greenberg Traurig clients 8 times and against them 4 times. So the win-loss record, very clear here. Of course, I'll concede that maybe that has to do with the strength of the cases and what they're involved in. I don't know if this directly influenced him or not. And that's sort of the problem. When you have these deals that can go on, it's going to affect at least the appearance of the court. I don't know. I can't tell you if it influenced any of these decisions, but now there is doubt cast on whether or not the decisions of the 8 times he voted in favor of these clients, did he do so saying, well, hey, maybe there's a little bit of influence here. I can't say for sure. And again, that's the problem. Now, in addition, a Denver-based lawyer for Greenberg represented North Dakota in what had become one of the most highly publicized rulings in recent years, which is a multi-state suit which reversed former President Barack Obama's plan to fight climate change through the Clean Air Act. So it gutted that Clean Air Act, many provisions in it. Gorsuch joined the court's other 5 conservative justices in agreeing with the plaintiffs, including Greenberg's client, that the EPA had overstepped its authority by regulating carbon emissions from power plants, in the decision that makes it more difficult for the executive branch to regulate emissions without express authorization from Congress. Now, look, Gorsuch, along with pretty much the rest of the conservative Supreme Court, is incredibly pro-corporate, pro-business, whatever you want to call it. They side with corporations the vast majority of the times. And let's be honest, sometimes they don't, but most of the times they do. Is this one of those cases where there was some influence from the lawyer? Again, I can't say. Maybe a tiny part of it. But again, going with Gorsuch, you know he's going to go for the corporations, for the oil companies. That's it. Now, the decision ended up being a huge boon for corporate polluters because we know that Congress ain't going to do a goddamn thing. Of course. Look, the House is under Republican leadership. And by the way, even when Democrats had the House, nothing would get through the filibuster anyway. So you had the filibuster. And even if you didn't have the filibuster, you still have Democrats like Henry Cuellar. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not in the Senate. Henry Cuellar is in the House, but still very, very pro-oil, very, very pro-gas. But you did have Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Joe Manchin gets bribed by fossil fuel companies in order to fight against any sort of efforts to curb carbon emissions. So, you know, it's not just Manchin. There are other Democrats as well that unfortunately do receive money from corporations, from donors in the fossil fuel industry. And so, yeah, that chance of anything climate related ever getting through Congress, which is the point. Now, Duffy, getting back to him, who in addition to serving as CEO, is also chief of Greenberg's entire 600 lawyer litigation department. Now, he says, though, oh, well, I've never personally argued cases before Gorsuch. I've never even met him socially. I've never spoken to him. I've never met him. Is there any way to verify that? No. No. I don't know if he's telling the truth. But again, seeing how this is, how there are no ethical standards for the court, you can't trust anything that they say anymore. I certainly can't, given what we also know about Justice Clarence Thomas, given that Gorsuch was appointed by former President Donald Trump. He was on a list of Heritage Foundation, picks. I'm sorry, the Federalist Society picks. These right-wing organizations, there's a lot of them. I don't trust them. I don't trust anyone to abide by ethics anymore. And when there's no rules, they're going to do whatever the hell they want. And there's nothing we can do about it. And that's the disgusting part. Now, Duffy claims that once he learned Gorsuch was among the owners, he decided to clear the sale with his firm's ethics department. Yes, oh yes, big corporate lawyer firms, famously known for their ethics. Bullshit. But as I mentioned before, the big problem here is the lack of, again, rules for the Supreme Court. Rules that exist in other courts, lower courts, and in Congress, they do not exist when it comes to the Supreme Court. The Code of Conduct for lower court U.S. judges say that judges should avoid the impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities. It discourages frequent transactions or continuing business relationships with lawyers or the persons likely to come before the court on which the judge serves. But again, that doesn't apply to the Supreme Court for some reason. Look, anywhere else, this sale would have raised some questions, okay? But we don't have this. And when it comes to the SCOTUS, Apparently, for some reason, they are considered to be infallible and uncorruptible in their opinions. That's absurd. Absolutely absurd. Why do they, oh, well, it's because they're not directly elected or anything like that. And somehow, no, that doesn't mean a damn thing. They're still appointed by whatever president happens to be in that place and confirmed by a Senate that, again, is completely and totally corrupted. That's why there's no trust in any of these institutions anymore. Now, Kyle Herrig, president of Accountable.us, said in this statement, quote, "This is exactly the type of situation that an ethics code that included vetting of transactions and full disclosure would clear up. Without decisive action, the conservatives on the Supreme Court will forever tarnish its reputation in our public life." Well, too late for that. Too late for that. It's already tarnished. Nobody has any trust in the courts. And situations like this, and I would argue that it goes all the way back to the 1970s, when the Supreme Court decided corporations were human beings and that money should be considered speech. That's pretty much where all the trust in the court was, in my mind, lost. Before I was even born, we've never had a Supreme Court, or in this case, a government that wasn't filled to the brim with corruption because of millionaires, billionaires being able to bribe our politicians and get everything that they want. It is a return on investment, and it started with the Supreme Court. And if that's not a good enough argument for some sort of Supreme Court reform, I don't know what is.